This video is brought to you by Captivating History. They say those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. History is full of costly, jaw-dropping mistakes. So if you know a lot about the past, you should be fine, right? The trouble is, there is so much history to learn, and so many mistakes have been made. Where do you start? Luckily, we have just the place. Here are the top 10 historical mistakes to avoid. Trusting Adolf Hitler. A lot of historical figures trusted Adolf Hitler far more than they should have. Perhaps most famously, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain is remembered for declaring that he had made peace in our time after conceding the Czechoslovakian-held Sudetenland to Nazi Germany. Hitler promised that he would have no more demands on the now defenseless country. But unfortunately, the Wehrmacht soon swallowed up all of Czechoslovakia. Trusting Adolf Hitler despite being paranoid. However, even more jaw-dropping is the case of Soviet General Secretary Joseph Stalin. The Georgian-born dictator was known for his paranoia. He slaughtered the entire top Soviet military brass and purified the Communist Party of anyone he suspected of having leadership ambitions. Indeed, there were 800,000 documented government executions during his long tenure, and many more people who disappeared due to Stalin's paranoid tendencies. The one person Stalin seems to have trusted was Adolf Hitler. So in August 1939, the USSR and Nazi Germany signed a non-aggression pact. It was designed to keep the communist country out of the coming World War. After the fall of France in June 1940, reports that Germany intended to break its agreement and invade the USSR made the rounds. There were reasons to be concerned. After all, in his book Mein Kampf, Hitler declared that Russia had to be conquered to provide the German people with living space. A communist spy reported to Moscow that war with Russia has been definitely decided on for this year. However, Stalin did not believe that Hitler would make that move and refused to prepare the Red Army for that eventuality. Instead, he continued to trade with Nazi Germany and ordered troops not to fire on the enemy until it was too late. Needlessly declaring war on the biggest economy in the world. While trusting Hitler was undoubtedly a mistake, Hitler arguably made a bigger one by declaring war on the United States. Americans love to discuss the role of the country in defeating Nazism in World War II. However, that war was chosen by Hitler and not by the American government. The United States was neutral in the war until the naval base in Pearl Harbor was attacked by Japan on December 7, 1941. Japan, Italy, and Germany had signed a mutual assistance pact the previous year. However, the agreement did not really apply. The pact was one of mutual defense and did not cover an attack against the U.S. Nevertheless, the Japanese expected and pressed for a German declaration of war. Hitler acquiesced. He believed that conflict with the U.S. was inevitable, and that with its relatively small military, they would not be a significant problem for the Third Reich. The U.S. was instrumental in the defeat of the Axis alliance. In addition, the solid isolationist sentiment in Congress may have prevented President Franklin Delano Roosevelt from declaring war on Germany. Therefore, history may have been quite different without this fatal Nazi mistake. Invading Afghanistan. Sometimes invading Afghanistan can seem like a good idea, or at least a necessary evil. However, it does not work out well for anyone. Since the 19th century, the country has earned the moniker the Graveyard of Empires. In the 19th century, the British Empire was engaged in a contest with Russia for Central Asia called the Great Game. The British stronghold in Asia was India, and the military created forward bases in Afghanistan to ward off their competitors. The Brits fought 3 Anglo-Afghan wars but never managed to establish a long-term foothold there. The British finally backed away from Afghanistan in the mid-20th century. The USSR moved to press its advantage in the area. However, a series of invasions in 1929, 1930, and most famously 1978 did not pan out well for the Red Army. The final invasion played a role in bankrupting the communist regime. In 1989, Soviet forces withdrew from Afghanistan, and soon after, the USSR ceased to exist. In 2001, the United States invaded Afghanistan in the wake of the 9/11 attacks. What started as a punitive attack and a hunt for Osama bin Laden and the other masterminds of the attack soon expanded into a nation-building project. By the time the U.S. withdrew in 2021, it was clear they had achieved few of their initial goals. The Taliban, which had aided and abetted Osama bin Laden, was back in power. Invading Russia. Invading Afghanistan is a big mistake. However, invading Russia is an even bigger one. It is easy to see why. Whether known as Russia or the Soviet Union, the country is physically the largest in the world. Until the mid-19th century, Russia was also the most populous kingdom on Earth. It is always monumentally tricky to control an area of that magnitude. However, the Russian weather adds another level of difficulty to the enterprise. The winter in most of the country is highly inhospitable. Therefore, military commanders have referred to it as General Winter or General Frost. Even Napoleon Bonaparte, perhaps the modern era's greatest general, fell victim to General Winter. When France invaded Russia, the emperor envisioned a swift decapitation attack. He planned in advance by the La Grande Armée into Smolensk and then on to Moscow. When he achieved the goal, Napoleon awaited the Russian surrender. It never came. The Russians employed a scorched earth policy and left the French nothing to live on for winter. Therefore, the French emperor was forced to withdraw with his remaining 35,000 soldiers. He had entered the country with over 600,000. It was the beginning of the end for Napoleon, who would soon be defeated and exiled. Not paying taxes. Al Capone was the most famous outlaw of his time. He established a criminal empire in 1930s Chicago and reportedly had more power than the mayor of the Windy City. Capone ran most of the illicit activity in the area, from gambling to prostitution to bootlegging. However, he kept his distance through a system of subordinates, and the FBI and local law enforcement could not build a case against the criminal mastermind. However, Capone had made one grave mistake. He did not file his taxes even once, despite pulling in millions of dollars. Al thought that they can't collect legal taxes from illegal money, but he was wrong. The IRS built an airtight case against Capone, and he was sentenced to 11 years in prison. Another mistake Capone made, not treating his rampant syphilis for years. That error in judgment ended up cutting his sentence short, and he died in hospice care. Kicking the slavery can down the road. The founding fathers of the United States were brilliant men. They designed an unprecedented system of checks and balances intended to safeguard liberty, which was primarily held up until today. But unfortunately, they also made an atrocious and immoral mistake, and we continue to live with the consequences today. The Declaration of Independence reads, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that their Creator endows them with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." These ideals are utterly incompatible with the institution of slavery. The man who wrote those words, Thomas Jefferson, was highly aware of this problem. He called slavery a moral blight and believed that it should be abolished. However, he maintained that it was politically impossible to emancipate the slaves, at least in the foreseeable future. Therefore, he explained that keeping slavery in the country was like holding a wolf by the ear, and we can neither hold him nor safely let him go. His judgment on slavery was also likely influenced by the fact that Jefferson owned several hundred slaves. The decision not to abolish slavery was an immoral crime against humanity. It also severely weakened the United States and led to a debilitating civil war. Though slavery was technically ended less than 100 years after the Declaration of Independence, the wounds of slavery in America have never healed. Selling Manhattan. A lot of the biggest mistakes in history are lousy business deals with significant long-term implications. We can't think of a worse one than the sale of Manhattan to the Dutch in 1626. The exact terms of the deal have never been fully clarified. However, according to Dutch sources, an unnamed Native American tribe sold the island to the Netherlands. It appears that the Munsee, a subset of the bigger Lenape tribe, were the unfortunate sellers. According to the best-known version, they sold the rights to Manhattan for $24 worth of beads and other trinkets. the Munsee and other Native Americans did not have a Western concept of private property. Therefore, they believed the deal was one of sharing presence on the island. Nonetheless, selling an island worth countless billions today for $24 worth of beads was a terrible mistake. Rejecting a guitar band from Liverpool. Most of the mistakes here involve wars and geopolitics. However, there was one showbiz mistake that has a rightful place in this list. On January 1, 1962, a young band originally from Liverpool scored an audition with Decca Records. Executives from Decca considered signing them, but a month later rejected the Beatles. They explained that guitar groups are on the way out, and therefore the Beatles have no future in show business. It didn't entirely turn out that way, as the Beatles have since sold 600 million records and still hold the title of most chart records 60 years later. Decca eased the pain somewhat by signing the Rolling Stones a year later. However, passing on the most prominent selling artist in popular music history had to sting. Leaving the gate open. Leaving the wrong gate unlocked can lead to a good deal of heartache and destruction. However, the most consequential mistake in that particular genre took place in 1453. Constantinople had been the capital of the Byzantine Empire for millennia. One of the secrets of its longevity was its seemingly impregnable walls. The city had survived repeated attacks and sieges as the defenses withstood the onslaught. There was no reason to believe the Ottoman offensive led by Mehmed II would end differently. But, according to Dukas, a contemporary historian, a terrible mistake contributed to the outcome. After 2 months of siege, a guard forgot to lock the small Kirkaporta gate. Imagine the surprise of a contingent of 50 Ottoman soldiers who assaulted the position, only to find it completely open. They quickly moved in and raised the Ottoman flag. The move renewed belief in the siege and nullified the myth of the inviolability of Constantinople. Not long after, the great city fell, and the Byzantine Empire ceased to exist. The importance of the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople is hard to overestimate. It marked the effective end of Roman rule in the East, or anywhere else for that matter. It also saw the establishment of one of the longest-lasting entities in Middle Eastern history, the Ottoman Empire. The consequences of the Byzantine defeat are still felt today. Where Constantinople had been the most significant Greek-speaking and Orthodox Christian city globally, it became, and has since remained, the Muslim-dominated and Turkish-speaking city of Istanbul. Mistakes are, by definition, unfortunate events. However, sometimes they can be a lot more. When a mistake is compounded by fate or bad luck, it can fundamentally change the world. We hope you enjoyed this video on the top 10 historical mistakes to avoid. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this. Also, grab your free mythology bundle ebook while it's still available. The link is in the description.